What's up? It's another edition of Mind Games, and it's kind of funny because when I started this series, it was meant to just be me chatting to different sports psychologists and performance coaches, and it's ended up becoming a whole thing about the major, funny enough. And I think it's just because the Shanghai Major is running currently. Today, I get the chance to speak to Jack, who is, Jack, let's actually just walk through what it is that you do at Vitality, because I throw the term sports psychologist around and performance coach, but I know everyone has a different explanation as to what they do. So what is it that you do with Vitality?
That's a good question. So my title is performance manager. The best way I describe it is my responsibility revolves around everything that is performance related that doesn't occur on the server. So my background is in sports psychology and performance psychology, and I've spent time working with athletes on their mental skills primarily. So not on the clinical side, but on the performance side and the tools and strategies athletes use to perform under pressure. So that's where my main focus is. But of course, I think what I've noticed in the CS scene at least is there's so many other areas that need to be looked after, but it doesn't make sense to have a dedicated nutritionist, a dedicated fitness coach. So I think a lot of us with a mental skills and sports psychology background end up also taking on and wearing multiple hats to try and help promote overall performance on pretty much anything that's performance rated outside the server.
It always fascinates me when I hear of someone who has worked in traditional sports and they've made the move into esports. So what different traditional sports were you working in? And then I suppose the second part of that question is, why the hell do you move to Counter-Strike from there?
So I've worked exclusively in rugby. So being Australian, it's a game like I played my whole life. I got really lucky that out of university, I had connections through my own time playing. I didn't play at a particularly high level, but I knew people who knew people and got opportunities through that, which, as I said, that sounds incredibly privileged, but that's sort of how this works. And for me to transition into Counter-Strike, I did some freelance work in London at the Red Bull gaming sphere, and made some connections and was heard about this role with Vitality when I don't know if you've ever spoken to, but Lars Robel was with Vitality, moved to Falcons. The opportunity came up, and I was just looking for something slightly different. And honestly, part of it for me, the role scope was way more interesting. Like rather than working one on one with players, where it's really rewarding and exciting, but you don't have an impact in the environment as a whole. You are set off to the side in a silo, helping players deal with their problems. Whereas here, it's an opportunity to be part of how can Vitality, we've got 9 staff here, or sorry, 4 staff, 5 players. How can the 9 of us take this team to the next level? So at that point, transition from one era to the next era was sort of the goal, as there was a big change. But yeah, that's sort of why a bigger role, more holistic, was something that I was really looking to try and get into.
So how many times in your rugby career were you beaten by South Africans? Because you are Australian and we are the superior rugby team.
Yeah, this is true. Me personally, I don't think I ever had the privilege of playing. I would have played plenty of South Africans, to be fair. We have a lot in Australia, but I don't know if the CS community understands uh, what like South Africa represents in rugby, but like they are the biggest, meanest, most terrifying people on the planet. And yeah, their national team is a frightening bunch of individuals. So it's not the most exciting people to play against. Lovely to play with though, and an amazing culture. Like, I don't know if we've got time to get into this down the track, but I love working with. I worked with a lot of South African players in my when I worked at in Tier 1 rugby, and they are incredibly terrifying, but incredibly lovely people.
I'm glad. I just needed to get that out there because obviously being South African, I always like it when we have some positive support. But that is the thing. Rugby is this very physical game. So it's sort of, for those that don't know, that there is a lot of physicality to it. It's a lot of brute strength. Counter-Strike, one, you're playing on a PC, right? There is no physicality. So, and it's a very different style that you have to bring. So what sort of skills come from traditional sport that you think make an impact in the server?
So from a strictly like sports psychology perspective, and what are the mental demands required in a sport like rugby and a sport like Counter Strike? there's actually a huge amount of crossover, right? You can imagine that if you start the pistol round and you don't get a kill, and then you're 4 rounds in, you're 0-4, you're feeling terrible about you start to, and I'm sure anyone who's watching can relate. You start to think, oh, today's just not going to be my day. Well, if the first 5 shots you take on a basketball court miss, you might start to have that feeling. If the first 2 balls you try to catch in a rugby game, you drop them, or you miss a tackle early, you start to have these doubts about, is today going to be my day? So the mental performance challenges that go with Elite CS are incredibly similar. The context, the performance context change. What a player might find, like, there will be a small player on the rugby field who sees a big guy running at them and they might go, what am I going to do about this problem? But to me, how's that any different to you feeling like you're alone on a bomb site and you know that there's 4 players who are about to rush you here and you're like, I don't know how I'm going to hold this site. I'm going to lose it, right? It's the same. It's the exact same internal psychological experience, just the performance context is different. So I actually don't find it that different working with these players because the core problem is the same. It's just what it is that's happening in the game that's different.
So now the biggest question that I tend to do with a lot of these interviews is asking about how you prepare a team, how you handle that. But I want to change it a bit for you because Vitality is a winning team. They are without a doubt the favorites going into the major. They've been one of the favorites. They're the favorites that go into most tournaments. You have arguably one of the best players in the world on your lineup. So a bit of a change here is, how do you prepare a team like that for the chance of losing? And I know that this sounds really absurd, but I'm presuming, especially like Vitality, we've seen them in a lot of playoffs where it hasn't paid off. In order to get a team to step back, recharge, go again, time and time again, how do you make sure that mentally they're prepared, for one of a better term, for the loss, if you like?
Yeah, no, this is actually one of the areas that I think Counter-Strike is more challenging than traditional sport. In a traditional sport environment, you play every week and your season doesn't end with a loss, so you get used to that experience. But usually when you lose in Counter-Strike, you've lost the tournament, like you're out. It's sort of like that opportunity to win the trophy is gone. So it's a double-edged sword because on the one hand, okay, there's a tournament in 2 weeks' time. We've got a chance to rebound and go for another trophy. Whereas in traditional sport, you might only have an opportunity at 1 or 2 trophies a year. But you can fall into that trap of feeling like when you lose a match, you've failed. But that's not like you can't define your success based on whether or not you are winning or losing every single trophy, because aside from a very few teams across the history of CS, you're not going to win every single event. It's normal to lose some matches. Like that's part of, like, you look across all sports and all performance, there aren't that many teams that just never lose. So normalizing the fact that we're not going to be at our best all the time, and so processing that so that losing doesn't become a habit, but B, also something that's going to change how we go about our business. So being very process focused, internally oriented. Now, of course, not all trophies are equal. Losing, there's the 4 main events that everybody wants to win, Cato, Cologne, and the 2 majors, and having poor performance to those is way more difficult to manage and handle than having a poor performance at a smaller event. So we try and approach it in a holistic manner in terms of changing our relationship to winning and losing, understanding what winning and losing means in the context of what we're trying to achieve. In terms of what is success for us over the long term, not as what is success for us. Because obviously success is clear match to match. It's like we can say, oh, well, we failed in Rio because we lost to Mouse and then we lost to Heroic. And in terms of the scoreboard, yes, we failed. But when we set out the year, that's not our primary focus to win that event. We want to see how that event, yes, we turn up to every event with every intention and effort to try and win it. But are we putting in maximal effort to make sure we peak there, or are we trying to make sure we peak now in this event, which is obviously far more important. So, and the coaches play a huge role in managing the training schedule and how we go about actually developing our performance over time so that we are where we want to be when we want to be there.
Is it difficult when you are working with a team who has one of the best players in the world and there is an expectation every single time that poor guy gets in the server that he needs to pop off and be the best player in the world? How do you manage that?
I think that, and I'm sure everyone has spoken about Matsu. I'm privileged to work with him. He's an incredible team player, incredibly chilled out, relaxed guy. Uh, he's not overly concerned with his own individual performance, and he wants the team to succeed and puts the team above himself at all times. So he's brilliant to work with. It's actually not a huge area that we spend time on because for him it's just not a major factor. Like, of course, he feels pressure, as everyone does. Of course, there's heightened scrutiny for him when he doesn't play at the level that people expect. Thankfully, he often plays at or above the level that people expect. But also for him, he's best way I can describe. He loves the game and he just wants to play with his mates, and it's such a good place for a performer to be in. He's not sitting there thinking about his stats. He's thinking about, is he enjoying playing CS? Is he enjoying competing? Is he enjoying being with his team? And that's just his natural state of being. So he's actually really easy to work with in that regard. He doesn't require a huge amount of support on this uh, because it's not something that really gets under his skin or gets into his head too much.
I have another show that I do called Feed the Trolls, and every time Vitality comes up, there is always a debate about whether ZywOo needs to have more of an ego, because we all know that he is exactly how you've described. And then there's always the conversation of, oh, well, he needs to be more egotistical, he needs to be more selfish. But I would argue that Vitality's success comes from the fact that he isn't the player everyone thinks he should be, and it's why they can have continued success. The question I wanted to ask is obviously traditional sports, lots of conversation about roster changes happen in the off season. It's not something that happens when everyone's playing in the leagues. You see it in football, but for some reason in Counter-Strike, and specifically in the last few years, it's become this obsession with the moment a team loses. And when I say lose, sometimes they can just lose a grand final, even if they played well. The conversation around changing the roster happens almost immediately. So I'm always curious how you deal with that internally as a team when roster rumors are always on the go, but also there is always one player who, if they do not perform, or maybe they just have a bad day, automatically the crowd is saying, well, that person must go. How do you handle that? Because I presume you take a lot of that on with the individual players.
Yeah, that is a really good question because I had a sense of this before I joined, that there was a bit more the wild west of Counter-Strike. Changes happen. It was a bit of a shock because, yeah, as you said, in traditional sport, you sign a 3-year contract. You're with that team for 3 years. Like, or at least in rugby, you don't, even if you're not performing, if you're injured, you stay contracted. Even it's very difficult for the team to move you on. Whereas here, teams change really quickly and seemingly quite impulsively. But we had a boot camp in Copenhagen at the beginning of the year, and we sort of agreed as a team, like as in our performance team, the players and staff, that one of our goals for the year was to end the year with the same roster. Now, of course, some of that's out of our control. The roster decisions are not necessarily made by the performance staff; they can be made by the organisation. But for us, we made a commitment to each other, almost like when you're in a relationship, we're going to try and work this out before we break up. We're not just going to ghost each other. We're going to try and get through this and find a way through our problems. So I, to be honest, like in a naive way, I think I tried to bring a bit of that from traditional sport in terms of like, we're really going to look after each other as family. And I wasn't fully expecting not how challenging it would be, but how much people were like, oh, we should change, like not within our team, but outside the team saying changes are needed, minus this guy, plus this guy, all this sort of stuff. And internally, we addressed it a couple of times where we reinforced to the players, both as a group and to individuals, that we're fully committed to this roster and that's all external noise. It was one of our goals to get to the end together. And that's not it feels good to be kind to each other goal. It's also a performance focused goal because when you look at it from an objective perspective, if you keep changing one piece of the puzzle, you got to relearn roles, you got to learn how to communicate with each other, learn how to play together, make tweaks here and there. I still believe strongly, I think the industry will pick this up over time, that there is benefit to building a strong foundation upon which performance can be built, and it might take some hard times, whether it's 3 months, 6 months, or a year, before you start to reap the rewards of those. And one of the hardest things in sport, whether it's traditional or otherwise, or esport or high performance, is just knowing when do you make that decision to change, to move away from trusting the process to adjusting the process. And that is a really, really challenging decision to make. And, we haven't had to make it at this point yet. We've been able to trust. So we've, yes, individually, I work with guys on how are they feeling about these rumors? Is it something that's bothering them? Are they feeling comfortable in the team? Extas Remy has done a good job of reassuring guys, this is our plan, this is how we're moving forward. So we don't let it fester. It's hard to get it out of people's minds because it is there. But we support guys struggling with that if they are struggling with it, but also try and create an environment that reinforces that, no, you're part of this team, and all that stuff is, BS.
So it's a bit stereotypical, but I do think it kind of applies here. Is a lot of the time in traditional sports, when athletes are on the rise, they're very social. They've lived a very different life, right? Whereas a lot of Counter-Strike players, they start very young. They spend so much time behind their PC, and whether we like it or not, when it comes to social interactions and things like that, they are normally a little bit reserved. They haven't had the same sort of interactions as say, a professional rugby player. And then you throw them into this world where, and it is a world where they have lived online now, that they live or breathe by what's happening in the game. They start playing, they start rising up the levels, and you throw them into this world where everyone online is commenting on who they are and what they do, and it is very accessible. It's not like they're reading about this in a paper. They are getting tweeted at every day. They have forums made about them every day. There are I've seen the death threats that come from the gambling community. Like, it is a lot to throw on a young person, and I would argue more so a lot to throw on a young person who hasn't had a lot of the social interactions that you would expect because they've spent so much time trying to be the best they possibly can be at Counter-Strike. So how do you deal with that? How do you handle the fan side of it with your players and try and, I suppose, give them the tools to cope with that? Is there actually a way to cope with it, I suppose, is also the question.
That second question is a really good one, because the obvious answer is not to read it, is to not be on social media, not be on the forums on HLTV. That is really tough. Like, we are all, varying degrees of security and confidence. We love the praise when we're playing well and people are saying, look how well so-and-so is playing. It feels great to read all this stuff. People say, oh, he could be number one this year, or he's, going to be top 10. He's the next best player in the world. Like, it's going to be an amazing career for this guy. So it's hard to take in the good, but then put out the bad. So for me, when I'm working with an athlete or a player on that, is like really clearly defining your boundaries around which opinions on your performance do you listen to. And, that obviously you need to listen to your coaches, your teammates, and then you might have parents or family members or close friends that know the game. Some people don't, and their parents or their friends or girlfriends want to give them input into how they're playing, which can not always be helpful if they don't know what they're talking about. But having clear boundaries around, so who's the 10, 15 people in the world whose opinion about my performance I listen to, and not getting too high on the positive comments when they're coming through from the internet, and not getting too low, or not listening to the negative ones. Honestly, the best solution is which isn't necessarily viable for everyone, because being part of the community is how people build their brand and build other streams of revenue, or monetize their performance. Vitality certainly want these guys to have presence online, to be put out there, whether it's through content, it's the same with the TOs. Like, so we want to put these guys out there. So it's hard to be out there, but then shield yourself from it at the same time. When you work with performers, there's a whole scope of work you can do around whether some people work in the mindfulness space, others I work in more of a applied cognitive approach of the ability to reframe the way we read this information, how we place meaning on it. And a lot of it's just practice of going, okay, well, Tech Girl has said that I'm terrible and shouldn't be in tier one anymore. Well, I mean, this is true of me, of course, but it's like, well, that's fine, but why does this opinion matter to me? Like, she's not signing my contract, she's not coaching me, so I don't need to pay attention to this. And practicing that cycle, which it sounds really obvious, but you need to practice the ability of, if you're going to consume this information, have a plan. How am I going to respond to the negative comments internally when I read them? Have a plan and execute it. Journaling can be good for this, but there's all sorts of practices we can use to try and maintain good sort of mental health and mental well-being around social media, which is it's essential in this, because the way I think about it is with rugby or football, after the match, everyone's at the pub talking about the game, and they'll be saying so and so was terrible, so and so can't play, they should be dropped. But the players aren't in the pub. But here in Counter Strike, the players are in the pub. They're online. They're hearing all of that information, and that's the big difference. It's jarring, but we need to help the players stay robust around this.
It ties into the roster change thing though, because I'm sure there is also a part of you that goes, shit, if I'm reading all of this, what happens if the people who do sign my contract are reading all of this? What happens if it changes the way they think? So I imagine dealing with that is quite difficult. It is one of the hardships of being a professional Counter-Strike player. Would you say it's one of the biggest hardships, or are there other things that you think affect players far more?
I think it is the single most challenging, or from a mental perspective, the single most challenging part of being a Counter Strike player at this level. Like, uh, there's you, if you allow it to, you can be bombarded with negativity, most of which is entirely untrue or unfounded. But the sheer volume of it can be incredibly overwhelming.
I can imagine. And then also like with the roster change rumors and things like that, there's probably a moment where you read something and go, oh shit, I didn't know that was happening. Now maybe my whole career is on the line because of something that may not even be true. What is it that you think though makes the difference? If you want to be in Vitality and playing in those grand finals, what is the difference between that player's mindset and say a player who's in tier two who kind of struggles to get outside of that the online cups, if you like? Is there a difference that you see from the players that kind of have the big match mentality and the winning mindset versus others?
The thing I put it down to is, and we talk about this internally in the team, so it's I suppose a little secret, but uh, the difference between confidence and belief. So confidence comes and goes. You feel like you're playing well, you're hitting your headshots, everything's like you're reading the game well, you're outthinking your opponents, you're winning your duels, you feel great. Um, your confidence skyrockets. But when you're not hitting your shots, when you feel like your opponents are one step ahead, every time you peak, you're getting killed, right? Your confidence can go down. The difference with the best players, and this isn't just in CS, this is across all sport, is when they're in a trough, when they feel like their form is going down, their belief about their level doesn't change. They know that the next round could be the round where they get an ace. It doesn't matter whether the last 5 rounds have been good or the last 5 maps have been terrible. None of that matters because, and look, it's easier as you get older and get more experience. Like Dan, Matu, Lotan have been playing at this top level for so long. They've experienced highs, gone down, come back up, gone down again, come back up. So you start to realize, okay, like I know that no matter what happens, I can come back from this. I know that I've been through times where I've played poorly and then bounced back in a big match. So they've built that resilience through experience. For younger people looking to break through, like that is transitioning from a confidence mindset to a belief mindset of knowing like, what am I capable of, and knowing I could experience that in my very next match, in my very next round. Doesn't matter what the last 5 rounds have been. The next round could be the one where I find my form again. Because I think people that struggle with that, taking that next step, struggle a lot with their feeling in the game because they go, well, I was good in at this level. Now I've gone to the next level. I don't know if I'm good enough here yet. And then that's where like that's mentally they're now at a disadvantage. And if things don't go their way, they don't feel good about the game. They don't play well, and it can spiral out of control.
That kind of ties back to my first question though. So if you are, an Apex or a ZywOo, you know what level you can play at, and then you're not playing at that level. it must be way tougher, because I'm presuming you're going to be a lot harder on yourself if you're not playing at that level once, twice, three tournaments in, because I imagine you're just going to beat yourself up a lot more than, say, someone who isn't 100% self-aware enough to know what level they should be playing at.
That's a very good point. Like the frustration that you can experience there doesn't go away because you've got experience or because you've reached a high level. Like you brought it up with Matsu earlier. Yes, when you're playing at a really high level consistently, anytime you're at a 7 out of 10 feels like you're not delivering for your team. So you can definitely experience that frustration. And we work with players on what we would call emotional regulation. So you are going to experience negative thoughts and negative emotions during performance, whether it's in a match or around an event, um, or over the course of a season. There's going to be tough times, and it's the ability for you to process those in a way that helps you get back to baseline as fast as possible. The mental skills that we're sort of talking about in games, that can be breathing techniques, self-talk, like mini visualizations, like things you can do to either reset and get back to it. On a bigger level, like we can have bigger interventions around, okay, the last three tournaments have been difficult. Like, is the frustration you're feeling, helpful? How would you like to behave moving forward? What do you think helped you perform well in the past? So knowing what gets you to your level is important. Knowing what perform, and I think I'm waffling a little bit here, but one of the big differences I noticed between traditional sport and Counter-Strike is I think a lot more players in Counter-Strike don't know what their best looks like. Like they will have played at a really high level for their standard, but they can't really articulate what that is they're doing that's working for them. It's very much feel based. I think this is primarily because you develop on your own. Like even if you get into teams, it's very much like you're playing on your own, grinding on your own. It's not until you get into professional CS that you now have a team with a coach with a structure. Whereas in traditional sport, you're playing in a structured environment from 13 years of age. You're getting coaches explaining you need to improve this skill, this skill, this skill. Whereas other players are like, well, actually, I just like sometimes my gut tells me to do this and I do it and it works out and I feel great. And it's like, well, what actually underpins that success? And they can't tell you. So developing awareness around like what makes you good, like what are the things that you do really well, what behaviors are you displaying on the server when you're playing with confidence. So start to understand that so that you can actually intentionally go towards it when you're not feeling there, because you'll find that when players drop off, when their confidence drops off, the way they play changes. They might play more passive, or some people are the opposite. They're like, I'm going to find it like this round is going to be an ace. I'm going to go out there and I'm going to get 5 headshots and I'm going to tear everyone apart. And of course, they play too aggressive and die instantly. So people respond to that pressure, that stress differently. So understanding, do I overplay when I'm stressed, when I'm under pressure, when I'm feeling negative, or do maybe I play too passive? I don't take a duel when I really should. Like even though I might die, I don't want to die because I don't feel confident, so I'm going to play too passive. So building that awareness around what your best actually looks like, so that you can, when you're not feeling it, you still have an idea of what you can try and do to get back to that level. And I guarantee you, if you play that way, eventually the good rounds will come, and then the good feeling will come, and then it'll cascade into the positive performance you're looking for.
I feel like that was really useful for anyone who is wanting to take that like step up and be more competitive in Counter-Strike. I'm kind of going to shift away completely from that now though, and talk a little bit about a broader subject, which I've touched on in a couple of these episodes, but we've really never deep dived in it. And that is kind of the mental health of professional players. I've seen it a little bit with those that are having to move around as much as this sort of scene makes you. You're flying around all the time. You're living in and out of hotel rooms, but there does seem to be a depression that follows a lot of pros, where they do find themselves sinking into depression. And I presume a lot of the stuff we spoke about counts to that, the mental health aspect. It is the fact that you're living out of a hotel room, your routine is constantly changing, you're constantly having to live with people having direct access to you online. Do you think that there's other reasons that feed into that with the Counter-Strike community?
I do. I remember a couple months into my role, I had this moment where I was thinking to myself, like, how do I feel about being involved in an industry that I just don't think is overall good for people's mental well-being? And I'm not saying that Counter-Strike or gaming itself is bad, but I think there is a culture around spending a huge amount of time behind the PC and not looking after ourselves. And one of the benefits that the pro players have is they can grind the game for 8+ hours a day and still have time to eat some decent food, to go outside and exercise, to socialize with friends. For people that are doing the grind whilst they're holding down a job or whilst they're at school, university, they might be basically not looking after themselves. They're doing their job, coming home, playing for 8 hours because they're trying to, get to that next level. They're trying to level up so that they can step into a pro environment. And I think looking after yourself is super important. We want to, I love the work that Emper's done around sharing his journey on health of it. Again, he's privileged. I don't like that word, but he's able to pursue his passion and look after himself in a way that others don't have that opportunity. But I think for the professional scene, yes, we have some real challenges here. As you said, living in hotel rooms, no routine. The food that we get on events is not always either the nicest or healthiest. Um, I know that all the other performance coaches, like if you come to one of these events, I'm sure you've seen everyone going and doing a team walk in the morning. And they'll be here in China. There's actually fans in the garden across the way from the hotel, and you have to walk past them. They've figured out where all the teams do their team walk to get out to catch them on the way through. But getting out for half an hour and getting sunlight every day is super important. Maintaining a good sleep schedule, sleeping 8 hours a night is super important. Exercising, nutrition, like this is stuff that I know a lot of performance coaches really push in their environments. It's for me, if I'm giving advice to a young player or to someone who wants to go to the next level, I wouldn't even touch on the mental performance, the sports psychology stuff until you've got your sleep in order. Like if you're not sleeping 8 hours a night, and there's so much science behind the fact that sleep improves cognitive and physical performance dramatically. So if you're only sleeping 5 or 6 hours a night, your Counter-Strike will be better if you sleep 8 hours a night. So having what we call good sleep hygiene, super important. And that's not just for your Counter-Strike, for your mental health as well. So I don't think the industry itself lends itself to great mental health, both at the community level and the professional level for different reasons entirely. We put a huge emphasis on in our team. I know a lot of other teams put a massive emphasis on making sure that our players' mental well-being is looked after because you won't have, for me, like mental well-being is like your physical health. If you have a broken leg, you can't play your sport. If you don't have good mental health, you can't play the best Counter-Strike you can play. Yes, you can turn up on the server, but you won't look like your normal self. You won't play at the level you want to play at. So it's a massive challenge, a massive area that we're lucky we've got time and resources to invest in that for our players to be in a position to be well. But it is tough, changing time zones, hotels, away from loved ones, all the scrutiny online, the pressure of being in these events. Like it's not easy. Like the level of stress, the disappointment that I know Navi would have felt after we're recording this the day after. That will take a couple weeks, probably, or days, definitely a couple of weeks, possibly, to process, to understand, and that's going to be a mental stress. And I hope that, I know they're well resourced. I hope they look after themselves and take care of each other because that's not an easy thing to go through.
I think the Navi example is so good because JL actually posted on social media just after the loss where he said, I let all the negativity get to me. I saw it all online after our first game. I fed it. I found myself in a hole. I've tried to change the way I behave because of what people are saying. So he always used to joke with the camera and people said it wasn't real. So he stopped doing that, but then that didn't feel real. And I think everything we've spoken about kind of he put down and said, this is what's happened to me as a player who ultimately was part of a team that was one of the best in the world and was on that era run. I know Vitality as an organization, though, takes the mental health aspect really serious. I believe they've started something that the KARE initiative, which feeds into that a little bit. We want to tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so for those that are familiar with the Valorant scene, they might be aware of there was a tragedy last year with a player, Twiston, who unfortunately took his own life. So Vitality have started the KARE Project to uh, raise awareness and provide support for people in the esports community that may be struggling, to make sure that people understand that everyone goes through tough times. It's not this is yeah, and it's not just something that's strictly esport, but everyone will go through hard times. It's amazing how much support you'll have. It'll feel at times like there's no one to talk to and no one that can help or understand what you're going through. But pretty much, you can call a friend, family, people will always be there to help. So the KARE initiative is about fostering a culture of uh, or building awareness around it, but fostering a culture of seeking support, seeking help, asking, and making sure that also we, as people in the community, check in with others, make sure we go, well, Sam, are you okay today? Like, is there something going on? I've noticed you're a bit down, or I feel like something's going on. Checking in, making sure that we're looking after each other. It's a really good initiative, and um, uh, it was. Obviously it was a real tragedy what happened. I was going to say it's a nice tribute to Twiston, which obviously that's not a enough of a tribute, but it's important that we continue to look after each other.
I'll put some links to the KARE initiative in the description to this video so you can go check it out. Final question. I am well aware you can't tell me anything, but I'm going to try anyway. What is the team vibe going into playoffs? How's everyone feeling? Have you got that prep going down? Are they ready?
Uh, I mean, we feel good. It is like China has been really good. I think we've enjoyed being here way more than we anticipated, given that we're away for a month. Um, Everyone's in the same conditions, that it's been a long time away from friends and family. We're incredibly pleased with the way we've performed in the RMR and elimination stage. We are super hungry for matches because I think we've been in China now for 3.5 weeks and we played 8 maps. So we want to play some Counter Strike.
We haven't had a chance to see the best of Vitality yet. I hope that we see it in the playoffs. Jack, thank you so much for chatting to us, and good luck with the major.
So thank you for taking the time. I love talking about mental performance.